The summer of 1986 smelled like honeysuckle and diesel fuel, and I remember thinking that nothing bad could ever happen in a place where the air itself tasted sweet. I was wrong. I was so terribly, unforgivably wrong. My name is Teresa Lee Scalf, and what I'm about to tell you is a story that has lived inside my bones for nearly 4 decades. It's a story about betrayal so deep it left scars you cannot see. It's about a small town that turned its back on truth. It's about a girl who lost everything and spent 37 years clawing her way back from the darkness. But here's the part that kept me awake for 10,000 nights. Here's the thing that will make you question everything you think you know about justice, about family, about the people you trust most in this world. The person who destroyed my life wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some faceless monster lurking in the shadows. It was someone who sat across from me at the dinner table. Someone who kissed my forehead and told me they loved me. Someone whose blood runs through my veins. And for 37 years, they walked free while I carried the weight of what they did. Now, before I continue, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever felt like the world looked the other way when you needed it most, if you've ever been silenced when you tried to speak your truth, then you understand why this story matters. Share this video right now. Subscribe to this channel. Because stories like mine get buried every single day, and the only way we dig them up is together. Stay with me until the end. I promise you, what happens next will change the way you see everything. Hazard, Kentucky in 1986 was the kind of place where everybody knew your business before you did. Population just over 5,000 souls, nestled in the Appalachian Mountains like a secret the rest of the world forgot to discover. The coal mines had been the heartbeat of this town for generations, and my father, William Ray Scalf, was a third-generation miner with hands permanently stained black no matter how hard he scrubbed. My mother, Loretta, worked the counter at Mullins Five and Dime, where she knew the name of every customer and the troubles that kept them up at night. We lived in a 4-room house on Maple Ridge Road, painted white with green shutters that Daddy had hung himself the summer I turned 7. There was a porch swing where Mama would sit on summer evenings, snapping beans into a metal bowl while fireflies performed their silent ballet across our overgrown yard. I was 16 that summer, 16 years old with a head full of dreams that stretched far beyond these mountains. I wanted to be a writer. Can you imagine that? A girl from Hazard, Kentucky, thinking she had stories worth telling. I would fill notebooks with poems and short stories, hiding them under my mattress like contraband. My English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told me I had a gift. She said my words painted pictures that made her forget she was reading it all. I believed her. I believed in a lot of things back then. My older brother, Daniel Ray, was 21 that summer, and he'd come back home after dropping out of Eastern Kentucky University. He told everybody it was because Mama needed help with Daddy being sick and all. But I knew the truth. Daniel couldn't handle being somewhere that didn't worship him. See, in Hazard, Daniel Ray Scalf was a legend. Star quarterback who led our high school team to the state championship in 1982. The kind of handsome that made girls forget their own names. Everybody loved Daniel. Teachers forgave his missing assignments. Shop owners let him run tabs he never paid. The police chief would wave when Daniel drove past, even when he was clearly speeding. Daniel could do no wrong in this town. And that was the problem. That was always the problem. Because when you convince a person that they're above consequences, you create something dangerous. You create someone who believes the rules don't apply to them, who believes they can take whatever they want. My best friend that summer was a girl named Sarah Beth Combs. She lived about a mile down the road, and we'd been inseparable since kindergarten when she shared her graham crackers with me on the first day of school. Sarah Beth had wild red hair and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, and she was the only person I ever showed my writing to. She thought I was going to be famous someday. She'd say it with such certainty, like she was stating a fact rather than making a prediction. We spent that summer like we'd spent every summer before. Swimming in the creek behind the old Henderson property, riding our bikes into town for ice cream cones at Dairy Queen, lying on our backs in the tall grass, and talking about boys we thought we loved. I had a crush on Michael Davidson, who worked at the gas station and always gave me extra napkins with my fountain drink like it was some kind of romantic gesture. Sarah Beth was convinced she was going to marry Tommy Peters, even though Tommy Peters had never said more than 3 words to her in his entire life. We were innocent in a way that seems impossible now. Innocent in a way that makes my chest ache when I remember it. We had no idea what was coming. No idea that by the end of that summer, one of us would be gone and the other would spend the rest of her life wishing she could have traded places. The first crack appeared in June. Daddy's cough had gotten worse, and the doctor in town finally sent him to a specialist in Lexington. Mama went with him, which meant Daniel and I were left alone for 3 days. Daniel had been different since he'd come back home. Quieter, angrier. He'd spend hours in his room with the door locked, and when he came out, his eyes would be red and unfocused. I didn't know about drugs then, not really. I'd heard whispers at school about kids who smoked marijuana, but that seemed as foreign to me as life on another planet. I didn't recognize the signs. I didn't understand that my brother was disappearing into something dark. That first night alone, I was in my room reading when I heard the front door open. It was past midnight, and Daniel had friends over. I could hear them laughing, bottles clinking. I crept to my door and opened it just a crack. Through the gap, I saw Daniel and 3 other men I didn't recognize. They were older, maybe late 20s, with hard faces and tattoos that seemed menacing in the dim light. One of them looked up toward my door, and I pulled back so fast I nearly fell. But not fast enough. I heard Daniel say my name. The next morning, Daniel acted like nothing had happened. He made pancakes, something he hadn't done since I was 12 years old, and he served them to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I wanted to ask about the men. I wanted to understand what was happening in our house while our parents were away. But something kept the words locked in my throat. Fear, maybe. Or that deeply ingrained belief that family means not asking questions. That loyalty means looking the other way. We had been raised on a particular kind of silence. In our house, you didn't talk about the bruises that sometimes appeared on Mama's arms. You didn't mention the nights Daddy stumbled home smelling of whiskey instead of coal dust. You pretended everything was fine because pretending was easier than facing the truth. So I ate my pancakes and I smiled, and I told Daniel thank you. And I pushed down the cold feeling in my stomach that something was very, very wrong. Sarah Beth came over that afternoon, and we sat on the porch swing trying to catch a breeze in the suffocating heat. She was going on about Tommy Peters again, about how he'd walked right past her at the supermarket without even glancing her way. I was half listening, still thinking about those men in our living room. About the look in my brother's eyes when he said my name. Sarah Beth noticed. She always noticed when something was bothering me. She asked me what was wrong, and I found myself telling her. About Daniel coming back different. About the locked door and the late nights and the strangers with their hard faces. Sarah Beth's expression changed as I talked. Her usual brightness dimmed into something serious, something scared. She told me she'd heard things. Rumors around town about Daniel getting mixed up with bad people after he left school. There was talk of gambling debts, of money owed to dangerous men from Lexington. Her daddy had mentioned it once, not knowing she was listening. Said William Scalf's boy had gotten himself into a mess that was going to bring shame on the whole family. I didn't want to believe her. Daniel was my brother. He'd taught me to ride a bike, had walked me to school on my first day of kindergarten, had threatened every boy who ever looked at me wrong. He was supposed to protect me. That was what big brothers did. But even as I defended him, even as I made excuses about stress and college being hard and Daniel just needing time to figure things out, I knew. Deep down in that place where we keep the truths we can't face, I knew that the brother I loved was gone. That whatever had taken his place was something I should be afraid of. Mama and Daddy came home 3 days later with news that settled over our house like a fog. Daddy's lungs were bad. Real bad. All those years breathing in coal dust had caught up with him, and the doctor said he had maybe 2 years if he was lucky. Mama looked like she'd aged a decade in those 3 days. Her eyes had that hollow, faraway look of someone who's already started grieving. Daddy tried to act normal. He sat in his chair and watched television and complained about the politicians same as always. But I'd catch him sometimes, staring out the window at nothing, his hand pressed against his chest like he was trying to hold something together that was already falling apart. The house felt different after that, heavy with unspoken fear. Daniel became even more withdrawn, spending days at a time away with no explanation. When he was home, he and Daddy would argue about jobs and responsibility and what kind of man Daniel was becoming. I'd lie in my bed at night and listen to their voices rising and falling like some kind of dark music. Once, I heard something break. The next morning, the mirror in the hallway was gone, and nobody mentioned it. July came with heat so thick you could chew it. School was out, and I had too much time to think. Too much time to watch. Too much time to notice that Daniel was getting worse. He'd lost weight, his cheekbones sharp under skin that had gone sallow. His hands shook sometimes when he thought no one was looking. And his eyes were the worst part. They'd gone flat and empty, like someone had reached in and scooped out whatever made him my brother. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. Have you ever watched someone you love become someone you don't recognize? Have you ever felt that helpless terror of seeing a person transform into something dark while you stood frozen, unable to do anything but witness? Leave a comment below. Tell me about that moment when you realized someone you trusted wasn't who you thought they were. Because if you've lived it, you know. You know that it's a particular kind of horror that never fully leaves you. The night of July 14th started like any other. Mama made meatloaf for dinner, and we ate in silence punctuated only by the television playing some game show Daddy liked. Daniel wasn't home. He hadn't been home in 3 days. After dinner, I helped Mama with the dishes while Daddy fell asleep in his chair. She was quieter than usual, her movements mechanical, her mind clearly somewhere else. I asked her if she was okay, and she looked at me with such sadness that I felt it in my chest like a physical ache. She told me she was worried about Daniel, that she'd heard things, same as Sarah Beth had, that she didn't know how to help him, and it was killing her worse than watching Daddy die. I didn't know what to say, so I just kept drying dishes and handing them to her to put away. Sometimes love looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like standing next to someone in the kitchen, letting them know they're not alone without saying a single word. Around 9 o'clock, Sarah Beth called. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Tommy Peters had asked Mary Ellen Burke to the summer social instead of her, and her world was ending. In the way that only makes sense when you're 16, this felt like a genuine tragedy. I asked Mama if I could walk to Sarah Beth's house to comfort her, and Mama said yes, but to be back by 11 sharp. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the night. It was about a mile to Sarah Beth's house, and the road wound through woods thick with shadow. I'd walked this path 100 times before, knew every route and rock by heart. I wasn't afraid. Fear hadn't found me yet. Sarah Beth's house came into view, lights spilling from the windows like an invitation. I could see her silhouette in her bedroom, pacing back and forth. I was about to call out to her when I heard a car engine behind me. I stepped off the road into the trees, just in case. Habit, maybe. Or instinct. Or something else that even now I can't explain. The car that pulled up wasn't one I recognized. Dark sedan, windows tinted. It stopped in front of Sarah Beth's house, and for a long moment nothing happened. I was holding my breath without knowing why. Then the car door opened, and Daniel stepped out. My brother. At Sarah Beth's house at 9:30 at night. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. I watched as Daniel walked up to the front door and knocked. Sarah Beth's father answered. Words were exchanged that I couldn't hear. Then Daniel looked over his shoulder, scanning the darkness like he could feel someone watching. I pressed myself against a tree trunk, becoming shadow. I didn't sleep that night. I made it home by 11, told Mama that Sarah Beth was feeling better, and went straight to my room. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel at that door. Saw him looking out into the darkness like a predator scenting prey. The next morning, he was at the breakfast table when I came down. Normal as anything. Eating eggs and reading the newspaper. He looked up when I walked in and smiled at me, and that smile made my skin crawl. I made myself sit down. Made myself eat. Made myself act like I hadn't seen what I'd seen. Because I still didn't know what I'd seen. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Daniel and Sarah Beth's father were friends. Maybe it was nothing. I was good at convincing myself that danger wasn't real. We all are, when we're young. We believe in the basic goodness of the world because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. Sarah Beth wasn't at our usual meeting spot that afternoon. I waited for an hour by the old oak tree where we always met, but she never came. I walked to her house, heart beating faster with every step. Her mother answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and told me Sarah Beth wasn't feeling well. Just a summer cold, nothing to worry about. But there was something in her voice that worried me plenty. I went home and tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. The stories that usually flowed so easily felt stuck somewhere in my chest, tangled up with all the questions I was afraid to ask. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I snuck out my bedroom window and made my way through the woods to Sarah Beth's house. Her window was open, just like always. We'd been climbing in and out of each other's rooms since we were 13. I hoisted myself up and through. Sarah Beth was sitting on her bed in the dark. When she saw me, she started crying. Not the dramatic tears of yesterday's heartbreak over Tommy Peters. These were silent tears, the kind that come when something inside you has broken past repair. I sat next to her and held her hand and waited. I knew better than to push. When you love someone, you learn when to speak and when to simply be present. Finally, she told me. The words came out in fragments, in stops and starts. Daniel, my brother, had come to the door last night, had told her father lies about me, said I was in trouble, said I needed help, said he was going to take Sarah Beth to see me. And her father, trusting the son of his neighbor, had let her go. I felt the world tilt sideways. Asked her what happened next. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said Daniel had driven her somewhere. An old cabin in the woods, somewhere she didn't recognize. There were other men there. The same men I'd seen in our living room. They'd offered her something to drink, and she'd taken it because she was thirsty and scared and didn't know what else to do. After that, everything got fuzzy. She woke up in the woods outside her house, dress torn, body aching in ways she couldn't describe. She didn't remember anything after the drink. Nothing at all. I'm going to tell you something now that will make you understand the kind of monster my brother had become. He had used me, used my friendship with Sarah Beth to lure her into a trap, made himself seem trustworthy by invoking my name. And whatever those men had done to her in that cabin, he had made possible. He had delivered her to them like a package, like she was nothing more than payment for whatever debts he owed. I held Sarah Beth while she shook, held her while she begged me not to tell anyone. She said no one would believe her, said everyone loved Daniel, everyone trusted him, and she was just a girl with wild red hair and a father who worked at the gas station. In Hazard, Kentucky, she said the Scalfs were royalty, and she was nothing. I wanted to argue with her, wanted to promise that justice existed, that truth always prevailed, that the monsters would be punished and the victims would be believed. But I was 16 years old in rural Appalachia in 1986, and I already knew she was right. I already knew that sometimes the monsters won because we let them. I made Sarah Beth a promise that night. I promised that I would find a way to make this right, that I would not rest until my brother and those men paid for what they'd done. It was a child's promise, born of fury and love and naive faith that righteousness was enough. I didn't know yet what the cost of that promise would be. I didn't know how it would shape the rest of my life. The next few days were a performance. I smiled at Daniel across the breakfast table. I answered when Mama asked me questions. I helped Daddy into his chair when his breath got bad. But inside, I was planning. Inside, I was made of nothing but fire and purpose. I started keeping a journal. Not the poetry and stories of before, but something different, something darker. I wrote down everything Sarah Beth had told me, every detail she could remember about the cabin, the car, the men. I drew maps based on her fragmented memories. I became a detective in my own home, watching Daniel for clues about where he went and who he was with. This was my first mistake. I thought I was hunting him. I didn't realize that by paying such close attention, I was making myself visible. I didn't realize that he was watching me too. It was August 2nd when everything changed. School was going to start again in 3 weeks, and Mama was talking about buying me new clothes for my junior year. Normal conversation, normal life. But nothing was normal anymore. I'd been following Daniel. Not physically, because that was too risky, but I'd started going through his things when he was out of the house. His room smelled like stale cigarettes and something chemical I couldn't identify. I found receipts from bars in Lexington. Found phone numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. Found a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was a Polaroid. A girl I didn't recognize, young, maybe 15 or 16. She was unconscious on a bed, and there were men in the background whose faces were cut off by the frame's edge. She was wearing a dress that looked like something from a school dance. I took the photograph. I don't know what made me do it, but I took it and I hid it in my notebook. This was my second mistake. The knock on my door came at 3 in the morning. I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, the photograph hidden between my mattress and box spring like a ticking bomb. Daniel's voice came through the wood, soft and dangerous. He said he knew I'd been in his room. Said he wanted to have a conversation. My hands shook as I pulled the covers up to my chin like they could protect me. I told him to go away, that I'd been asleep, that he was drunk or crazy or both. For a long moment, silence. Then his footsteps retreating down the hall. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, or the night after that. I was 16 years old, and I'd become a prisoner in my own home, afraid of my own brother. The worst part was having no one to tell. Mama was consumed with Daddy's illness. Daddy was too weak to do anything even if I'd found the words to explain. Sarah Beth was barely speaking, even to me. She'd pulled inside herself like a turtle retreating into its shell. The police weren't an option. Sheriff Burton and Daniel had been thick as thieves since Daniel won that championship game. They went fishing together, played cards on Saturday nights. The sheriff had given the toast at Daniel's graduation party, called him the future of Hazard. No one would believe a teenage girl over the town's golden boy. I made a decision. If no one would help me, I would help myself. I would gather enough evidence that even the most loyal defender couldn't look away. I would build a case so airtight that the truth would speak for itself. It was a child's plan, really, born of desperation and fed by the kind of righteousness that only the young possess. I didn't understand, yet that sometimes truth isn't enough. That sometimes the people in power prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable realities. I started with the Polaroid. The girl in the photograph had to be someone. Had to have parents who were looking for her, a school that noticed her absence, friends who missed her smile. If I could find out who she was, I could prove that what happened to Sarah Beth wasn't an isolated incident. I spent hours in the town library, going through newspapers from neighboring counties, looking for missing persons reports, articles about runaways, any hint of girls who'd disappeared. Mrs. Patterson, my English teacher, worked part-time at the library during summers. She noticed me there, day after day, and eventually asked what I was researching. I lied, told her I was working on a mystery story, wanted to make it realistic. She smiled and said she always knew I had a future in writing, that my stories would take me places Hazard never could. Her faith in me was like a blade. It cut deep because I knew that if she ever found out the truth, she might not recognize me anymore. I was becoming someone different, someone harder, someone who knew that the world was darker than fairy tales suggested. 3 weeks into my investigation, I found her, the girl in the photograph. Her name was Jenny Marie Wilson, and she was from Pike County, about 40 miles east. She'd gone missing on April 15, 1986. 16 years old, last seen leaving a friend's birthday party. The article was small, buried in the back pages of a regional newspaper. The photograph they'd printed showed a bright-eyed girl with long brown hair and a smile that seemed to hold secrets. Same girl as the Polaroid. I was sure of it. I made a copy of the article and added it to my growing file. Evidence, I thought. Proof. But proof of what exactly? That Daniel had a photograph of a missing girl? That proved nothing. He could have found it anywhere. Could have been given it by anyone. I needed more. I needed to connect Daniel directly to Jenny Marie Wilson's disappearance. I needed names, dates, witnesses. I needed things a 16-year-old girl had no way of getting. The summer was ending. School would start soon, and my opportunities to investigate would shrink. Mama was talking about me getting an after-school job at the Five and Dime. Daddy was getting worse, needing more care. Normal life was waiting to swallow me back up, to make me forget about justice and vengeance and truth. I wasn't going to let that happen. On August 18th, I did something unforgivable, something that haunts me still. I went to Sarah Beth's house, and I asked her to help me. I showed her the Polaroid, watched her face crumble when she recognized the men in the background. She could see parts that I couldn't, she said. Could see a tattoo on one arm, a distinctive ring on a hand. Details that meant nothing to me, but might mean everything to someone who knew where to look. I was using her trauma, her pain, her shattered sense of safety, all in service of my obsessive need for justice. She agreed to help because she loved me, because she trusted me, because she believed that I would protect her, that together we could bring down the men who'd hurt her. I should have told her to run as far and fast as she could from Teresa Lee Scalf and her dangerous crusade. School started on September 2nd, and I walked through the halls like a ghost. Friends I'd had since kindergarten seemed like strangers now, their conversations about boys and clothes and homework alien and pointless. Sarah Beth was the same. We'd sit together at lunch, not speaking, connected by a terrible knowledge that set us apart from everyone else. Mrs. Patterson noticed the change in me. She kept me after class one day and asked if everything was okay at home. I wanted so badly to tell her everything, to lay it all at her feet and let an adult handle it. But I saw the way she looked at me, the concern in her eyes, and I knew that if I told her, I'd be putting her in danger too. Daniel was capable of anything. I'd learned that now. So I smiled and said everything was fine. Just tired from summer. Just adjusting to junior year. She didn't believe me. I could tell. But she let me go because what else could she do? September passed in a blur of classes I didn't care about and investigations I conducted in secret. I'd followed the tattoo Sarah Beth remembered to a bar in Lexington called the Black Dog. It was the kind of place that didn't card at the door and didn't ask questions about why a 16-year-old girl was sitting alone in the corner, watching. The men I was looking for weren't hard to find. They came in every Thursday night, loud and drunk and confident in their untouchability. 3 of them, always the same 3. Plus Daniel, who'd greet them like old friends and disappear into a back room that regular customers weren't allowed to enter. I learned their names by listening. Rick Dobson, the oldest, with silver hair and dead eyes. Marcus Pope, built like a linebacker, with the tattoo of a snake winding up his forearm that Sarah Beth remembered. And Billy Wayne Hurt, the youngest, barely older than Daniel, with a nervous laugh and a tendency to drink more than the others. They were careful about what they said in public. But alcohol makes even careful men stupid. One night in early October, I heard enough to connect the dots. They were running girls. Not a lot, just a few at a time. They'd find them at parties, in bars, sometimes just walking alone on empty roads. They'd drug them, use them, and when they were done, they'd drop them somewhere they'd never be found. Most of the girls didn't even remember what happened. Just woke up confused and ashamed, their bodies telling stories their minds couldn't access. Those were the lucky ones. Jenny Marie Wilson wasn't lucky. I heard Billy Wayne mention her name. Heard him say something about a situation that had been handled. The way he said it, casual and cold, like he was talking about disposing of garbage. I had to leave before anyone saw me crying. The evidence was mounting. Names, dates, snippets of conversation I'd written in my journal with shaking hands. But it still wasn't enough. Not for a court of law. Not for a town that worshipped my brother. I needed something concrete. Something undeniable. Sarah Beth and I talked about going to the police in Lexington instead of Hazard. They wouldn't know Daniel, wouldn't be blinded by his football glory. But we were 16-year-old girls with no physical evidence, no witnesses willing to speak, nothing but a story that sounded too terrible to be true. We'd be dismissed as troubled teenagers seeking attention. We'd be sent home to face the consequences of accusing upstanding citizens. I started skipping school. Mama was too distracted with Daddy's decline to notice, and the school didn't call home because I'd intercepted the letters they sent. I spent my days building my case. Photographed the cabin where Sarah Beth had been taken, now abandoned and cleaned of any evidence. Tracked down former girlfriends of the men, hoping one of them might have seen something. Most doors were slammed in my face. A few women listened, their eyes holding knowledge they refused to speak. One, a waitress at a diner in Jackson County, told me I was going to get myself killed. Told me these men were connected to people who could make problems disappear. She said she'd had a sister once. Had. The word hung in the air between us like smoke. I should have been scared. I was scared, terrified every waking moment. But fear wasn't enough to stop me. Nothing was enough to stop me. I'd made a promise to Sarah Beth. and I was going to keep it no matter what it cost. Halloween night, 1986. The night that changed everything. Daniel was home for once, sitting on the couch watching a horror movie with the volume too loud. Mama had gone to bed early, exhausted from caring for Daddy. I was in my room, adding the latest details to my journal, when I heard glass breaking downstairs. I froze. Footsteps, heavy and unfamiliar. Daniel's voice, raised in surprise, then something that might have been pain. I crept to my door and opened it just enough to see down the stairs. Marcus Pope was standing in our living room. Behind him, Billy Wayne Hurt. They had Daniel backed against the wall, and Marcus was holding something that glinted in the lamplight. I didn't scream. Some survival instinct older than thought kept me silent, kept me pressed against the wall, kept my breath shallow and quiet. Through the gap in my door, I watched as Marcus Pope explained the situation to my brother in terms that left no room for misunderstanding. Daniel had been skimming, taking money that wasn't his, thinking he was smarter than the men he worked for. The boss in Lexington wasn't happy. The boss wanted his money back, with interest. And if Daniel couldn't pay, there were other ways to settle debts. Marcus looked up toward the stairs, and I pulled back so fast I nearly stopped breathing. He said something about the sister. Said she might be useful for something. Payment in kind, he called it. My stomach turned to ice. Daniel was bargaining now, his voice high and desperate. Said he'd get the money. Said he had a plan. Said to leave me out of it. That I didn't know anything. That I was just a stupid kid. The contempt in his voice when he said it, the way he made my existence sound insignificant, would have hurt if I wasn't so terrified. There was more discussion that I couldn't hear clearly. Then, finally, the sound of the front door closing. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, until I heard Daniel's footsteps going back to his room, until I heard his door close and his lock click into place. I knew then that I had run out of time. Marcus Pope knew about me, knew where I lived, knew I was something that could be used as leverage. The investigation I'd been conducting so carefully was about to become irrelevant, because I'd be dead or worse before I ever got a chance to use it. I had one night to act, one night to take everything I gathered and turn it into something that could protect me. I crept down the stairs at 2 in the morning, avoiding the creaky spots I'd mapped out as a child playing spy games. Daniel's room was at the end of the hall, and I could hear him snoring through the thin walls. Mama and Daddy's room was quiet, both of them lost in the kind of exhausted sleep that illness brings. I grabbed my journal from its hiding spot and added it to my backpack. Then I did something I'd been planning for weeks, but hoped I'd never have to execute. I went into Daniel's room. He stirred when the door opened, and I froze. But the snoring resumed, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. His desk was in the corner, covered in papers and empty bottles. I'd gone through it before, but never thoroughly. Never with the desperation of someone who might not get another chance. In the bottom drawer, under a false bottom I'd discovered during earlier investigations, I found what I was looking for. A ledger. Names and dates and dollar amounts written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Records of transactions that could only mean one thing. And at the back, a list of girls. First names only, followed by dates and something that looked like payment received. Sarah Beth's name was there. July 14th, $1,500. I photographed every page with the Polaroid camera I'd bought with saved birthday money. My hands shook so badly that some of the photos came out blurred, but I kept going until the film ran out. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and retreated to my room like a ghost. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed and watched the ceiling lighten with dawn, knowing that this day would determine the rest of my life. At 7 o'clock, I called Sarah Beth from the kitchen phone while Mama made coffee. I told her to meet me at the oak tree in 1 hour. Told her to bring anything that might be useful. Told her that today was the day we'd been waiting for. Sarah Beth met me with red-rimmed eyes and a determination that matched my own. She'd brought her own journal, filled with details she'd remembered in the weeks since the assault. Together, our evidence was substantial. Not enough for a conviction, maybe, but enough to start an investigation. Enough to make people ask questions. We walked to the bus station together, two 16-year-old girls about to do something that could either save us or destroy us. The bus to Lexington left at 10. By noon, We were standing outside the offices of the Kentucky State Police, our hands clasped tight enough to bruise. The detective who met with us was a woman named Elena Rodriguez. She had kind eyes and silver hair and a wedding ring that she twisted when she was thinking. She listened to everything we had to say without interrupting, looked through my photographs, read our journals, examined the Polaroid of Jenny Marie Wilson. When we finished, she was quiet for a long time. She asked us if we understood what we were accusing these men of. If we understood that making false statements to law enforcement was a serious crime. I told her I understood everything. Told her that I knew we might not be believed, that we were just girls from Hazard with no power and no connections. But I also told her that somewhere there was a mother who deserved to know what happened to her daughter. That somewhere there were other girls who'd woken up confused and ashamed, not knowing that what happened to them had a name and a cause and perpetrators who deserved to be punished. Detective Rodriguez nodded slowly. Then she picked up her phone and made a call that would change everything. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Detective Rodriguez had been tracking Rick Dobson for years, suspecting him of various crimes, but never able to prove anything. Our evidence, fragmentary as it was, gave her a thread to pull. Within a week, she had warrants. Within 2 weeks, she had the cabin. And in the cabin, she found things that made even hardened investigators sick. The trial was set for March of 1987. In the meantime, our family imploded. Daniel was arrested on November 15, 1986, dragged out of our house in handcuffs while Mama screamed and Daddy wept from his chair. The look he gave me as they led him past, the pure hatred in his eyes, is something I carry with me still. He knew. Somehow, he knew that I was the one who'd brought him down. Mama didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. When she finally did, it was to tell me that I destroyed our family. That whatever Daniel had done, he was still her son. That I should have come to her, should have let her handle it, should have done anything other than what I did. She asked me how I could live with myself. I told her I was finally learning how. Daddy died on December 22, 1986. His last coherent words were to Daniel, who wasn't there to hear them. He asked for his boy, asked where his boy had gone. I held his hand and lied. Told him Daniel was just outside. Told him everything was going to be okay. I'd become good at lying by then. The trial made national news. For men accused of running an assault ring in rural Kentucky, targeting teenage girls from families too poor or too scared to fight back. The prosecution presented evidence that went back 5 years, victims from 3 states, a pattern of predation that was almost industrial in its efficiency. Sarah Beth testified. I will never forget watching her on that stand, her voice steady even as tears rolled down her cheeks. She told the court what happened to her, every terrible detail, while the defense attorney tried to make her seem like a liar or a slut or both. She never wavered. Not once. I testified too. Told them about finding the Polaroid, about overhearing conversations at the Black Dog, about the night Marcus Pope came to our house and talked about using me as payment. The defense tried to paint me as a troubled teenager seeking revenge on a brother who didn't pay enough attention to me. Tried to suggest that my journals were fiction, creative writing exercises rather than documentary evidence. But the jury saw through it. Saw the truth that I'd spent months gathering, piece by painful piece. Rick Dobson was convicted on 12 counts. He's still in prison today. Marcus Pope received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. They found Jenny Marie Wilson's remains based on his testimony, traded for a chance at eventual freedom that will never come. Billy Wayne Hurt died in custody before the trial ended. They said it was suicide. I have my doubts. Daniel, my brother, the golden boy of Hazard, Kentucky, he was convicted of 15 counts of various charges. The judge, in his sentencing, called Daniel the most dangerous kind of criminal, the kind who wears a mask of normalcy while harboring a monster beneath. Daniel received 45 years without parole. The last time I saw him was at his sentencing hearing. He turned to look at me as they led him away, and the hatred in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Something that might have been recognition. He mouthed 2 words at me. You won. I nodded. Because I had. After everything, after the fear and the grief and the cost, I had won. Truth had prevailed. Justice, imperfect and incomplete as always, had been served. But victories in stories like this are never clean. They're purchased with things that can't be recovered. I lost my mother to a bitterness she would carry until her own death in 2003. Lost my home in a town that saw me as the girl who betrayed her own blood. Lost years to nightmares and therapy, and the slow work of rebuilding a self that had been shattered by everything I'd witnessed. Sarah Beth and I tried to stay friends, but we were too much reminder of each other's worst days. She moved to California after graduation, became a nurse, married a good man who knew nothing of what happened to her in a cabin in the woods. We exchanged Christmas cards. That's all. I left Hazard in September of 1988, the day after I graduated high school. Mrs. Patterson came to the ceremony, the only one in the audience who was there for me. She hugged me afterward and told me that I was going to do great things, that my voice was a gift that the world needed to hear. I wanted to believe her. I enrolled at the University of Kentucky, declared an English major, and started writing in earnest. Not the poems and stories of my childhood, but something harder, something that demanded witness. I wrote about what happened in Hazard. Wrote about Daniel and the men he worked with and the girls they hurt. Wrote about Sarah Beth's courage on that witness stand and the sound of the gavel when the guilty verdicts came down. I wrote, and I rewrote, and I learned how to shape truth into something that could be shared. My first book was published in 1996. It was called The Summer of My Undoing, and it told the story of 1986 through the lens of fiction. The names were changed and the details altered, but anyone who knew what really happened would recognize it. The book was not a bestseller. It was something better. It reached the people who needed it. Women wrote to me from across the country, telling me their own stories of assault and silence and the long journey toward healing. They told me that reading my words made them feel less alone, that knowing someone else had survived, had fought back, had found a way to live despite everything, gave them hope. I kept writing, kept speaking, kept showing up in places where my story might make a difference. I testified before Congress about the failures of rural law enforcement. I worked with organizations that support survivors of assault. I spent 20 years doing the slow, unglamorous work of changing systems that allow predators to thrive. And somewhere along the way, I found love. Michael Davidson, the boy from the gas station who used to give me extra napkins, found me at a book signing in Lexington in 2002. He'd become a firefighter, divorced, with 2 kids who needed a mother. He'd followed my career from afar, he said. Had always known I was going to be somebody. We were married in 2004, in a small ceremony in a garden in Lexington. I wore white because I could, because no one had the power to take that from me anymore. His children became my children. His life became my life. And for the first time since that summer of 1986, I felt safe. Truly, deeply safe. In 2019, Daniel died in prison. Natural causes, they said. Heart failure. He was 54 years old and had never expressed remorse for what he'd done. I didn't go to the funeral because there wasn't one. Mama had died years before, and no one else claimed him. He was buried in a pauper's grave somewhere in eastern Kentucky, the golden boy reduced to an unmarked patch of earth. I thought I'd feel something when I heard the news. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Instead, I felt only a kind of tired peace. The chapter was finally closed. The monster was gone, and I was still here, still standing, still telling my story to anyone who would listen. This year, 2024, I turned 54 years old. The same age Daniel was when he died. I think about that sometimes. About the parallel tracks our lives took. Born from the same parents, raised in the same house, shaped by the same mountains and the same small-town expectations. How did we become so different? How did he become a monster while I became whatever it is that I am? I don't have answers. Only questions. Only the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. Sarah Beth called me last month. It was the first time we'd spoken in years. She told me she'd finally told her husband everything. Told her grown children. Told the people in her life who loved her and deserved to know. She said reading my latest book gave her the courage. She said hearing my voice, even through words on a page, reminded her that she wasn't alone. That she never had been. We talked for 3 hours that night. laughed and cried, and remembered things we'd spent decades trying to forget. And when we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Whole. The story of 1986 is not a happy story. It's a story of violence and betrayal and the terrible things that happen when good people stay silent. But it's also a story of courage and resilience and the stubborn human insistence on justice even when the odds are impossible. It's a story about two teenage girls who refused to be silenced, who took on men with power and money and the protection of a town that preferred comfortable lies, who stood in a courtroom and told the truth even as the world tried to make them small. It's a story about me, Teresa Lee Scalf, survivor, writer, wife, mother, human being who learned the hard way that the only voice that can speak your truth is your own. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want you to know something. Whatever you've survived, whatever you've witnessed, whatever truths you're carrying that feel too heavy to bear, you are not alone. There are people who will believe you. There are people who will stand with you. There are people who will fight for you when you're too tired to fight for yourself. Find them. Let them in. And then, when you're ready, become that person for someone else. That's how we win. Not through grand gestures or Hollywood endings, but through the small, daily choice to keep going, to keep speaking, to keep insisting that truth matters even when the world would prefer silence. I made a promise to Sarah Beth in the summer of 1986. I promised her that I would find a way to make things right. It took years. It cost everything I had. But in the end, I kept that promise. And keeping that promise showed me who I really was. Not a victim, not a survivor. Something more. Something harder to name. Someone who refused to be erased. The summer of 1986 smelled like honeysuckle and diesel fuel. I was wrong when I thought nothing bad could happen in a place where the air itself tasted sweet. Bad things can happen anywhere. But so can good things. So can justice. So can love. So can the slow, painful, beautiful process of healing. My name is Teresa Lee Scalf. This has been my story. And for the first time in 37 years, I can say those words without feeling like they're being torn from my chest. I can say them with something that feels almost like peace.